Good afternoon, Peter and Frezi. I
Hello,
appreciate you guys finding the time to come hang out with me for a little bit.
good to see you.
Hey.
No, good to see you as well. You threw me quite the curveball, and it's a great one because, Peter, I was only expecting to see you, and your wife's here as well. So I had some questions that I planned to throw your way. And honestly, I think the conversation is going to be a lot more fun now that she's here.
Yeah, then I don't have to do the talking. I can just have a beer.
It
Oh,
makes my job easier too. So, Peter, I don't know if you remember this, and I'm 100% sure you do not. About, I think it was 2015, I was sitting at, I think, Victory Brewing in Pennsylvania, and I'm just sitting at the bar having a pint, and I heard a voice that I recognized. And I'm thinking to myself, why does this guy sound familiar? And at that point in time, I was doing a lot of home brewing, listening to a lot of podcasts. And I kept thinking to myself, I know this guy's voice. I know this guy's voice. I had heard you on a podcast slightly prior to that, and you were sitting next to me there at the bar, and like I said, at Victory, and I turned to you. You were the nicest guy in the world, and it was just a brief interaction we had, but I remember
I
it.
find, from my perspective, we had driven all the way from Philly, and I finally had a beer. I had the Brewmaster's Pilsner or something. It was really a good Pilsner, and it was like all I needed, you know. And then the conversation, I was so relaxed having a beer. So
I know after traveling, it's just nice to have that first pint. It's always something to look forward to. And I
yeah,
think that was in, like I said, 2015 or so, quite some time ago. So,
could
yeah, but
be.
that was when Belgium was first launching in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, yeah.
But,
I always asked
oh, go ahead.
when we were out and about with New Belgium, a lot was hanging out with salespeople or doing some events. But I always asked to see the good, the bad, and the ugly, and then a brewery. And so the brewery was the relaxing part always for me. You know, you go hang, have a beer, chat with somebody else, and who's like-minded, and so it's always fun. Those.
Awesome. Well, without a doubt. Now, I want to take things way, way back. I always like to ask the people I speak with, when you were just a kid, what did you think you were going to be when you grew up? Like,
I was gonna be I was probably 3 or 4, and I was going to be a bricklayer because they were building a house next to us, and that looked like so much fun. Like those guys, layer by layer, a whole thing came out of the ground. That was fantastic. What else would I wanted to be when I grew up? I remember that like as the first one. Um, I've been as a kid all over the place, but then I think in humaniora we call it. So in high
second,
school,
yeah, middle school.
it was high school already. We had a great teacher on biology and chemistry, and he kind of uh, opened my world on how chemistry of life really was, and that was for me very eye-opening. And then I did my entry exam, or for however, I don't know how to translate that in that subject in when the heck was that in 82 about genetic modification or something, but something that was completely out there, that was not very was completely on the edge. And so I really wanted to do that. And so did I answer your question? That brought me more. I want to do something with life science. I want to really.
and
Well, the thing that I remember from Peter is that in university, he was a bioengineer. And it's then that he decided to become a brewmaster because he's like, well, it's way more fun to taste your product than to smell some paint or whatever you're going to smell when you're a bioengineer. For me, I first wanted to become a teacher, but then I kind of left my home when I was 12 years old. Well, I started bartending when I was 16 to bring myself to college as an accountant.
at what point in time did the both of you meet?
When the heck was that? 89?
89. Yeah.
89. I was a very intense cave climber. Um, we were doing really extreme stuff at that point. And from time to time, we had to do showcase kind of what we did, so that we got some members and some funding, because we had so many ropes that we had over 1,000 meters of ropes and whatever that we had to maintain and replace. And so I think that's where we first met.
We met in an exhibition that was called Free Time.
Oh yeah. And so we did that as a caving club for getting some exposure, because you don't get much exposure underground.
Now, Peter, I'm going to put you on the spot. What year did you two get married?
92.
There you go. You got it.
October 10 awesome. Coming up. April 10. April
September
10.
12th.
For the church. April 10 for the city.
So at what point in time did you decide that beer was your calling? You know, was it as were you a home brewer at that time? Were you just drinking something out of?
No, for me, beer really came out of that biochemistry. Biochemistry then felt so boring because it was nanograms and microliters. And we had a brewing department in our university. And every time we passed there, we saw those guys moving stuff around with hoses, with their boots on. And maybe we should do that. And so for me, I really stumbled in it. It's here in the US, we have way more homebrewers coming in. Homebrewing scene is not that big and existing in Belgium at that point, and still not too much. And so most people that end up professional in brewing do brewing engineer. There's still 5 universities teaching that in Belgium, who's way too much for such a small country.
And Frezi, from your perspective, I know you had said you wanted to be a teacher. Did you end up teaching, or what career field did you go into?
So when I was 16, I started bartending, and my parents really wanted me to go to the university. In Belgium, teaching is only like community college, we call it, and they really wanted me to go to university. So I became a certified financial planner. But to make it all around, I kept on bartending, first in Belgium and now here. So,
and before we moved, she ended up at the police force in Belgium.
Yeah,
who was a very really nice crew to go out with in Belgium. The first time that the first week she was working there, so on Friday, why don't you come to the police office? Because I went with the train to Rodenbach, and so it was close to the train station. And I go there, and she's like, why don't you go to the 3rd floor? And on the 3rd floor, it's Belgian police. They have a full-fledged bar, so that they can bring people in that are in distress and basically put them a bit at ease. And so I had to sell Rodenbach.
He was in distress.
Going to the police force.
Yeah, as certified financial planner, I only worked as an accountant for 1 year. I love doing something different every day, and that was just too boring for me. I couldn't do it. So then I went to the police force.
Cool, sounds exciting. Now, for the both of you, because you both own Purpose Brewing together, Purpose Brewing and Cellars. But this isn't your first brewery, Peter. You owned De Zwingel. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
that
was your first venture into entrepreneurship. Did you own it together?
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So this came actually kind of out of home brewing. As I did some investments in Rodenbach, there was some smaller equipment that kind of got set aside. And so I took that home and we started using that for brewing, like on a 30 liter, like a 10-gallon scale. And then, and then we bought a 5 hectoliter, so a 4-barrel mash lauter tun from another brewery. And then we didn't have other equipment around it. And yeah, suddenly we got sucked in and we ended up having a brewery.
That's so funny because so many homebrewers just end up growing their equipment. So I guess you made good use out of it.
Yeah, there was all the old yeast vessels from Rodenbach that I started with. So
it was fun.
So I take it you both ran that business together. What was that experience like? You know, what roles did both of you, have back then at that first brew pub together?
So in the brew pub, it was a weekend job, and the main thing we did there was buses. So big groups coming in all at once, leaving all at once. So on invitation. So Peter was still with the Rodenbach, I was still with the police force. And yeah, I was bartending and he was brewing.
Don't imagine this is what 94 somewhere in Belgium, and the beer market in Belgium is very established and not very innovating. So what we did was just one beer. We had water from the tap if you wanted some water, but if you wanted food, you could bring it in. Or we catered it in if it was a bus. So we kept it very simple because it was a side job for us.
Wow. So you only had one beer, and what was that beer that you had on tap?
It was Hacken. It was not Hackeneer. What was the name? It was a blonde beer that we made actually with the Rodenbach yeast, who was basically a mixed culture yeast that we were trying to avoid any impact or as much impact as possible from lactobacilli. And so it was only slightly sour, but it was the slight sourness was actually very confusing because the alcohol was actually up there. And so we gave our farewell party there in Belgium there, and so many people got wasted because there was such an easy drinking beer, and they were.
As an afterthought, we should send you some pictures of the swingle, because the bar itself was a brew kettle, the dancing floor was a filter of the mash tun, and then we have all those wooden planks around the dancing floor.
Yeah, the wooden planks were from footage, so it was actually beautiful. The location was fantastic.
The more you talk about this brew pub, the more fascinated I get. Frezi, you said it had a dance floor. Is that correct?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You don't get a lot of breweries these days that have a dance floor. I'd love to hear a little bit about the type of events you had there.
So, like I said before, it was always groups. So that we had a whole group coming in, a whole group going out, so that we never were stuck with one customer. Anniversary parties, wedding parties, just cyclists.
Yeah.
Always groups.
Because we were basically open for groups. So if you wanted to do something, we were open. If you didn't want to do anything, we were closed.
So everybody who came knew there'd probably be dancing involved, I take it.
Yeah. They're not me. Come on.
Did you ever have live music there?
No.
Interesting. That's fascinating. So what were the challenges?
The biggest party we had there was 200 people. That was our goodbye party. But
yeah, but we really, there was a niche for basically bus traffics or other groups that came by and that needed a pee break basically, and also wanted to have some entertainment. And so that was kind of what we filled in, as we couldn't really do it. We had to take a half day off. It was during the week,
And so Purpose is right next to the bike lane. Same for the Zwingle. It was right next to the bike strip. And yeah, just groups, either a bus or bikers, cyclists.
It sounds like a great place to visit. Now, what challenges did you learn while you were there running this business together? Were there any certain mistakes that you made? There we go. I want to hear what that lap's about.
not going to the States, or just saying, split and gone.
There were a lot of challenges, but the building was owned by a used brewing equipment guy. And so we basically were like, I need a spray ball. Let's go look on the 4th level and find a spray ball. So that was easy on getting it. But then I needed a heat exchanger from the brew house. And he's like, I don't have a heat exchanger. And then via in the brewing industry, I heard, but he actually has a pasteurizer. So I can use a pasteurizer as a heat exchanger for cooling wort. And so we sometimes had to find it via what he had. Taxes were interesting because this location, or that tax area, only had one brewery and had never seen a new brewery. So we had all the tax people in there the first day that were brewing the whole day. And do you have beer? Well, I know we're brewing the first time. It was Belgium. It was
It was good. I was working at the police force. That was good.
Yeah, and that's a challenge so many small brewery owners face. They're running a brewery, while also still, balancing their other job. I mean, I think that's so common in today's industry as well.
Yeah, but it was a fun project, but it was to me, the key part was I started to get bored in Rodenbach, where I didn't give enough challenges anymore. And so I was already searching for something new. And that was fun because I learned some small business aspects in Belgium. Um, but then when we met Kim and Jeff, suddenly like, oh, wow, maybe that is a whole different challenge. So
Had you thought at any point prior that you were going to pack up your lives and move to the States to pursue something brewing related?
No.
No, not at all. Even at the moment that we were talking, that was in the Boston Craft Brewers Conference in '96, when they were mentioning that they were looking for a Belgian brewer. My first thought was like, "Oh, good luck!" Like, you just heard, we have a full-time day job and we do a brewery on the side and we want to do caving. Like, we're looking for something else, right?
So, Frezi, were you there? Were you there during those conversations where Peter? So how did that go? Like, I mean, obviously, Peter, you were like, good luck with it. What was the added touch that made you start to consider moving over to Colorado? Oh, secret?
Yeah, so somebody comes in and we're not open here, so
just go to my. So we were sitting both, and in the evening we were talking to Daryl and somebody from which brewery?
Yeah, so in the evening we were talking with Daryl Goss, who was running Cambridge Brewing at that point, and he was kind of the guy who really convinced us on exploring the idea. He was like, "Do you know where Colorado is?" I'm like, "No," and they're like, "He's like, this brewery. It's kind of an up and coming brewery. Why don't you give it a try?" I was like, "Why would we give it a try?" He's like, "You're on vacation. Why don't you do it?"
So we first drove to Maine and on to the falls. Which falls? There's like
Niagara Falls.
Niagara Falls. And then in Chicago, we were like, well, why don't we have 3 weeks here in the States. Why don't we actually go to Colorado and see what it is? So we drove in Colorado. I saw the mountains, the Rocky Mountains, and I was like, oh my gosh. Dum, 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 dum. And Peter came over. He went to the brewery, had a 3-day interview with mainly Kim and Brian Callahan. And then he got more and more interested. And then I was like, oh shit, I shouldn't say that. I really, really love my job in Belgium. I didn't mean this. So I was first really interested. And then he got interested, and I was like, oh no, what am I doing? So we went back and forth for a couple of times, but yeah.
So we did a whole road trip from Boston back and forth, and it was
fun.
A little bit tense. Just the conversation that we had while we were not sleeping because we sometimes drove through the night.
Yeah.
That must have been a very exciting time, because moving, to a brand new state's one thing, but a brand new country. I mean, there's so many challenges in the learning curve. So when you decided to finally pack up and say goodbye, do your, awesome party where everybody got wasted, what was the first observation you made in America? You were like, people do what? And you got just really confused. Is there anything that, just blew your mind?
All the mailboxes next to each other. Like a whole apartment complex full of mailboxes.
Or even in the rural areas where you see a wooden bar with mailboxes on.
Yeah.
And it was, it's not so different, Europe and the US, but you see quite a bit new. You see with new eyes or new country, and then especially living in it and also working and interacting with people, how they do business, how they work, and then especially New Belgium was then a pretty unique place also to work in. So a lot of the stuff was like, whoa, how are things going here?
What really intrigued us in the States compared to Europe is, yes, the States is way younger compared to Europe, the history, but also the people act that way. The people always pick up on something new. Like here in Purpose, we have a new beer every weekend. Whereas in Belgium, it's history, it's calm, it's like seniors over there. Be careful, don't move too fast, you know.
We also discovered that a house is made of cardboard or something like that instead of brick, because I started hammering on the wall to put something in, and I went through the wall. I'm like, what? What did we just buy? This is a house made in cardboard, and it's not cardboard. It's something else, but I haven't figured it out yet.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting observation, because one of my favorite things when I get to travel to Europe is the mix of history with modern culture. You'll see like a church that's, 1,000 years old, and next to it you'll have a McDonald's. And my wife and I love seeing things like that. You don't get that feeling in America. But at the same time, like you mentioned, go ahead.
No, you're fine.
I was going to throw another question out there. Like you don't receive that feel in America because we're such a young country.
Mm-hmm.
So when you go ahead, Frezi.
The funny thing is that you mentioned you have that history, and on the same time you see the McDonald's. That's an American thing that you see
in Europe.
The spring up thing, and yeah.
Perhaps that was a poor example.
And then especially here out west, the history is very young. For Collins, 1870, like 1870, like, oh, really? Like, oh, we did some caving here. And if you're everything that's found in a cave that's over 50 years old is historical trash. So currently I would be historical trash now if I go caving. So...
Yeah.
So working at New Belgium, because after that little stint of running your own brew pub, the two of you, what did it feel like to go back to work for someone else? I know, like Frezi, you were still kind of working for someone else while you were in Belgium, but for Peter, for you to go into a company that wasn't yours, what was that experience like?
No. So while we were running the Zwingel, I also was working at Rodenbach. So Rodenbach was doing pretty much everything, and Rodenbach, it's a big place, but it's actually a relatively small brewery. And so after 10 years there, the day I gave my resign, I went to the CEO and said, look, I'm going to give my resign. And he starts tearing up. And because he didn't really have somebody right away to replace me. It's also Europe, so they could require me to stay on for a while until they can bring somebody up, and then they could at that point they could require for 6 months. So I was still working there until basically the last 3 weeks before we left. So I've always worked. Except for now, I guess, for the boss. But now Frezi is the boss. Eh?
Yeah, but on the other hand, Kim Jordan always let you do what you wanted to do. You were never under her. You were always next to her.
Yeah. This was a home brewer who started a brewery that grew way too fast. And there were a lot of foundations that were not brought in place. And you come in from more established brewing country and you're like, oh, wow. There's stuff that needs to be done, simple stuff on cleaning, on inspecting welds, and just the backbone of brewing. And that for me made me very enthusiastic, but it was also very confusing for them. Like we just had put in a new location. I'm like, this is not going to work. We need to cut this out. And they're like, we just invested in this. But it was just, there was no... Yeah, it was a home brewer. There was no backbone. People didn't understand stainless, didn't understand process, didn't understand cleaning really truly. Homebrewers understand cleaning, but they are not able, or they're not used to dealing with. In this case, it was 500 hectoliter fermenters, and so I was like, "Hey, we need to stand still. We need to work on fundamentals out. Otherwise, we're gonna run into trouble." But this is the US. You don't stand still. We were going while I was trying to fix what we had done or what was done before.
At any point in time, did you regret your decision to, leave your home country to come to the States in those early, months?
For Peter right now, because he's yearning to go. We lost Dad exactly a year ago. So Mom has been in Belgium and we cannot visit her. So right now it's really hard on Peter. Other than that, probably not.
Yeah.
If you take a step back from a professional brewing career, and Belgium is very well established. Some of my friends are still working at the same brewery that they were working in at the moment I left, and that is very typical in Belgium. Yeah, and they don't even question it. And for me, I think you're way richer if you get to experience another culture. As some of my brewing class um, students that I was with, uh, quite a bit live abroad, and we all have, I think, rich lives because we got in contact with different cultures, different places, did things way more than getting stuck. I probably could have worked in Rodenbach still, as Rudy still does. He made his whole career there,
Yeah.
and I would be fine, you know. But then the opportunity or absorbing and working and living in a whole different world, I think, and especially in the US in this stage, has been fantastic. Because it was a growing craft beer market. People kept on making new beers. We have to keep on growing the physical, growing the plant. We were experimenting with management styles. It was fantastic.
And that's also why I love going now to South America, because they are where America was 10 years ago.
Yeah, I truly believe life is all about experiences. We don't take ourselves outside our comfort zones, then we don't have the opportunity to learn. And I'm a traveler myself. I miss traveling right now. I'm itching to get back on the road, whether it's just driving a state away or, a country 6,000 miles away. I think we all very much miss that right now. And Frezi, I have to ask you, so when you, first accompanied your husband to Colorado, how was that for you? How hard was it to get accustomed to the culture, and what were you doing during those early days when he was at the brewery?
So the hardest one for me, I've always longed for responsible jobs and stuff. Like right now, CEO of Purpose, is really fun for me because it's a responsibility. When we first moved over, I moved over with a spouse visa, and I had to sit at home. I was not allowed to work. I helped out a lot, I volunteered a lot. We got kids in 99, was the firstborn. But the first months, the first year moving over was really hard, that I was not able to get a work permit.
What did you do? You said you volunteered. What else did you do to pass the time?
Mostly volunteering, especially helping next to Peter. I worked in every department in New Belgium. Worked next to Peter now, every department in New Belgium. Teaching. I did a lot for the elementary schools and middle schools. Yeah.
So it sounds like you kept yourself pretty busy then.
It was fun. Painted a couple of houses.
Oh, cool. So following that first year, were you able to actually get a paying job?
So I became an American. I'm dual citizenship. Yeah.
And at that point in time, when Peter was at New Belgium, what were you doing?
New Belgium.
Oh, you were there as well. Understood. And what was your exact role? Did you say packaging, or what department were you primarily in?
No, so originally with Peter, before the boys, I was everywhere in New Belgium. New Belgium was 30 employees on that moment. And then I take care of the boys, took care of the schools, and then came back to New Belgium, mainly as giving tours, bartending, and teaching the new employees that are coming in.
That's fantastic. Now, Peter, you mentioned management a couple minutes ago. Going from Rodenbach to New Belgium, what were the greatest changes you experienced in management styles between Americans and Belgians?
Yeah, Rodenbach and in general Europe was unionized. It's quite different than how you see unions here, but there were general contracts made, so there wasn't really wage discussions from manager to employee. It was also more a settled environment. There was not much dynamic. I got some money to do some investments, and I got some more opportunities within the brewery as I worked there longer. But it was way more settled. Then here in New Belgium, when we started, but maybe the kind of the thing that most struck me was a month after I worked here, we went with all employees on a retreat in the mountains, and Kim and Jeff were just saying like, look, we want to give a part of the company to the employees. You guys are the employees. You guys figure out how you're gonna divide it up. How, like, what is this? Like, had never really thought about that, had never really considered. They were already doing open book management. So every month we got together with employees, although we were not owners, and we talked about financials. And sometimes somebody in the room was like, hey, I'm going to try to reduce the glue on the labels. Could we split that out on the P&L? And they're like, okay, we'll split it out. So he could see the financial results of the little project that he was doing. And so that was for me like completely new. We also started trying to, we were growing so fast and we were trying to get our legs underneath us on who do we want to be. And so we did that very broad, larger management group, but also we brought from time to time, we were not that big as a company then, but we brought in all employees and we were discussing, look, we have been considering, we could be continue to grow, and we called it, should we go to Texas or not? But it didn't mean Texas, it was, should we go, are we going to continue to invest in this physical plant here? It's going to open opportunities for you, but it's also going to be bigger. And so it was a very unfamiliar management style that was happening, maybe specific for New Belgium, but also part to the US.
And at what point in time, did you realize that you'd spend a huge bulk of your career at New Belgium versus just an opportunity to have your first brewing job in the States?
To me, so when we established ownership, we said, okay, the newbies, and I was one of the newbies, have to be accepted for ownership. And so during that ownership speech, the main question was, because I was the foreigner, how long are you going to stay here? And to me, that's a stupid question, in the sense that I always said I want to stay as long as I can learn.
Absolutely.
And people thought I was very uncommittal, but then the learning path in New Belgium was so variant over time. I always had the same title, but my position really changed over time.
So why did people think you were non-committal?
Because I didn't want to say I was going to stay here forever. I just said I'm going to stay here as long as I can learn.
Understood. So let's kind of fast forward. You stayed there quite a long time. I mean, you're very well known for your career at New Belgium. You've done amazing things there. At what point in time did the both of you get that entrepreneurial itch to want to start something of your own again?
So that's probably what Peter was going for when he just started, when he said back in time, hey, you want to become an owner? Well, how long are you going to stay here? As long as I can learn. So then when he decided to resign, so Peter resigned in New Belgium 2016. I just was 17. I just resigned in July, this last July. But that was exactly what he said to Kim. He's like, I'm not learning anymore. So
I'm not learning fast enough.
Yeah.
We just had put in Asheville was up and running, and that was a fantastic project. From find the location to design, build, and then deal with your own mistakes or whatever, and basically do the startup, was a fantastic experience that I loved it. And then I came back from Asheville and I'm like, what do I do now? And so I took a sabbatical in New Belgium. Every 10 years you could take a sabbatical. It was only like 6 weeks or something, but really reflected quite a bit and talked with a lot of brewery owners and brewers, of course. And it really appeared to me that there's so much beauty still in American brewing. Why don't I do something, try to add again to that perspective from a very small brewery? And so the as I was traveling through the Western US, the idea became, how can I get it smaller? How can I get it smaller? How can I get it smaller? So
I understand that entrepreneurial itch for sure, but just thinking about when you're in a relationship for 20 years, I can't even imagine because I've never done it before. But when you've been with someone, been with a company that long, how did that weigh on you mentally to have to think about leaving?
I mean, you make a decision and you kind of have to go to giving your resign. And I was very nervous around that because after such a great relationship, you don't want to blow that up. And it was a hard discussion. And or Kim maybe was smart enough to say, like, let's take a break and let's kind of get back together in a couple of hours. And that really helped for settling her, because I knew where I was walking into, but I didn't want to break the relationship. And then we met at her house, we cracked a beer, and we sat together, and um, we left hugging and kissing as it should have been in New Belgium, you know? Yeah, and then she asked me to stay on even for pretty much the rest of the year. So that was another 9 months. And I'm like, yeah, of course. Hey, I didn't want to break pots and pans. Is that how you say it in
Whatever.
English? I didn't want to be, yeah, after such a long relationship.
Big pictures behind you.
Yeah.
And were you planning Purpose Brewing while you were finishing up your time at New Belgium, or did you start planning that adventure, following your departure?
I was already planning on that before. So I started looking. Frezi's requirement at that point was that the boys are still in high school here. We have to do something in town. So we started exploring locations, possibilities. And we weren't even planning to do that fast, but suddenly we really got an offer that we couldn't refuse on an existing brewery. And basically a week later, we had a brewery on our hands, and that was end of 16. But we closed that brewery and we started brewing for barrels because we had a lot of barrels here, and we wanted to have a barrel program. So we brewed like for 5 months for barrels, filled up the room with barrels, and then started working on how can we make this our brewery, because it was an existing brewery that felt kind of relatively cold, and we wanted to make it way warmer feeling. And so that all happened, and somewhere during that brewing period I said I need to start moving on, so I need to give my resign. So
It had to be very exciting times.
Yeah.
yeah, there's a window here, so I was never close to the window when I was working here. It was a very stealth operation, um, trying to do this, um, doing it in the evenings again, doing it in the weekends, whatever it took.
You mentioned one thing about wanting to turn the brewery that you took over into your own. And going through your website, I absolutely love the storytelling you have there. And I want to read a couple lines that you had on your little description. And it says, the proud fruit of this little acorn is what we hope to nurture at Purpose Brewing and Cellars, just as the acorn does with nutrients, minerals, and water from the soil to become a gallant tree. Purpose Brewing and Cellars wants to do exactly the same. And I love that. I love the story you have on your website. So, how important is storytelling in both, explaining what your company stands for, but also the beer that you produce?
It's immensely important. I didn't realize that it being a brewer in Belgium. In the US, as a brewery, become front of the brewery, who was very confusing for me. Like I'm the guy who makes beer, and I need to go talk to so and so. That was very confusing for me. But the storytelling is actually a very beautiful part, I think, about about the US. Today we stopped at a brewery, and you kind of ask, uh, "How did you become? What are you about?" And there's really great stories and great learnings in it. I think beer is worth a story, any beer. And there's always some thoughts. Like this week, we did a bike trip in Las Cruces, New Mexico, and we were staying with a friend, and the neighbor had mesquite beans, and so we grabbed some, and we were trying to dissolve them in some beer. And so this weekend, we're going to have honey mesquite bean beer here. And but it's an authentic story. It's Frezi and Peter just biking in Las Cruces, New Mexico, hanging with a buddy that we know for a long time, and climbing over the wall from the neighbor to get some beans, and starting playing with that. And there's a beer. It happens like this.
So my dad is a sculptor, and when somebody asked him how long did it take you to make this sculpture, and he always answered 3 days and 30 years, because there's so much story coming on, and then all of a sudden you have it. It doesn't take long to actually make it. There's so much history behind it.
That's good. That's the acorn, eh?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's interesting because it almost combines, your background and coming from Belgium and the history of Europe. You take that storytelling, the history, with the American culture, the American innovation,
Mike,
and you combine it into your current, your brewery at purpose.
Go ahead. You didn't follow that. Sorry, I'm sorry. Could you just repeat that for one time?
Sorry, no, it's all good. I was saying that you've combined the history and storytelling of Europe with the innovation and, the modern aspects of American brewing culture, which is fascinating.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly our history. Just in New Belgium, they love to ask you, hey, if you would be a beer, what beer would you be? And I always thought that was the Transatlantique, because there's so much history behind it. And then you come over and there's a new beginning, a new fun thing, and new spark. Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Peter.
It's all interconnected. It's not standing alone. But I was thinking, for me, I had worked on a book, Wood and Beer, and then you see what coopers do with oak trees and how they select an oak tree, and what passion that they have for an oak tree. And you see, I'm just using barrels to make beer, but it goes so far down, and it goes back to the roots of the acorn. And so it was, for me, a striking moment that you see that passion from a whole different business that you don't know too much about it, who had stories on his own that completely translate into what you can do with it. And people in a bar, we want to hear about a beer, but the story is really what sticks in my eyes. And people
really stories what connect people. Absolutely.
Talking about that story, I'm thinking about when we were newly engaged, boy and girlfriend, and where we were spelunking in the balloons to the French part of Belgium. Peter always drank the same beer, Chile. So for his next birthday, I brought that beer home, and he was almost like, what the heck are you doing? I'm like, sorry, I thought you loved that beer, you always drink it. Yeah, but that beer has so much story behind it. That beer is only for that location. That's where it's meant to be. You cannot bring it home. I'm like, okay.
No, I love that. And Peter, when you sent over your bio, I was reading that you have a title at the brewery, Chief of Wisdom and Other Nonsense. Where did that come from?
When I moved here, it was 3 days before the GABF. And so Kim and Jeff and Brian and Stacy, they're like, oh, we're going to a beer festival this weekend in Denver. Do you want to join us? And we walk in the GABF. 96, it was small, but it was so huge compared to what we know in Belgium. And so we get 1 ounce of beer in a glass. And I really liked the beer. And I started talking to the brewer, and he starts talking about this beer. And I tried to say, like, hey, like, my glass is empty. And he just kept on talking. And I think you need to realize that beer is only 10 minutes of pleasure. It's something you're going to taste it. You're going to be like, oh, wow, this is really good. You want to know a little bit. But after that, it's about entertainment. And people want to hang out with their friends, chat with their friends. They don't want to chat with me for an hour. And so that's why I wanted to bring down wisdom also to the level of nonsense and play with that term. You don't want to be that overpowering wisdom guy. No, I'm also chief of other nonsense. So
I think you need a good mix of wisdom and nonsense to make the world go round. It keeps life entertaining.
yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Crazy. How about yourself? Do you have any, unique titles like that to go along with you?
So, like I said, well, I only left New Belgium this last July during COVID, or I would still be there. So I'm the CEO, Tinkerbell. So my main thing that I was going to do on purpose, every now and then, if something went good or wrong, make sure that bell rings from, hey, we need to do that a different way. But I'm still working in New Belgium. So I don't have too much time, but I'm that angel, that flinder on the wall. So every now and then, ding, 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 ding. So CEO Tinkerbell.
I love it. I absolutely love it. So working together as a couple, have you had any challenges, working, as husband and wife? Has there ever been a moment where you regret the decision to, involve your spouse in the business?
We don't have a moment of regretment, but I think we have different management skills and way more like, hey, this has to be done this way. Whereas Peter is way more, hey, if you can do it yourself and petering out, you do it. I don't need to be involved in that anymore.
It always delivers some stress for a couple, but it's only a business, It's a business. It's an entity where you have people living in. It's not your complete life, so you can disagree on the business, about aspects of the business, and in the end, it's only the business,
Yeah, absolutely. I think you need to separate your personal from work sometimes. My wife and I do the same thing where it's good to just unwind, forget about work, and like, look, we're married together. We might work together, but let's have a little fun sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of times.
So,
but yeah.
like, speaking of fun, in conversations these days, you see the argument, is the industry about the quality of the beer or is it about the marketing? Because everybody's making really good beer these days, and whether it's more about the quality, whether it's about the marketing, I don't want to talk about those two. What percentage of craft beer is simply about the fun, having a good time, the community? Where does that play into the equation?
80%.
Yeah, for me, the reason why I'm here is the community, for really, because and now especially in COVID, like we had such a hard time. There's 21 or 20 breweries in Fort Collins, and we checked in on each other. We have a beer, we chat about the issues we have. Like, oh, I can help you on that. I have blah blah blah. Or and so the community has been very interested, very. That's for me where it hangs on. It's also on such a small business where you run a tap room. It's also about the community of your customers. A lot of our customers are our friends. It's beyond being a customer. We go bike with them. We do things together. They just happen to be customers, and we met here, as a brewery should be. It's a place where people meet, and that is for me a very important thing. And it's also, I still can have fun. I can create whatever, and people are going to try it anyway. Whether those mesquite honey beans, they're going to drink it and they're going to have passion around it, hate or love, But you can still play in that aspect too. But the community is very important for me nowadays in this world here.
And you've been in the industry quite.
It's totally different with any other business. I think the brewery world is so amazing, so much fun because we do have the community. Go to any other industry and they have so many secrets. They don't want to work together. Right now, during COVID, we have the vaccination companies who all work together. They didn't do that before. Only breweries are doing that.
So working together as a team, are there any goals you still want to accomplish together?
There's so much, life is too short. For me, I want to learn, and it was the Craft Brewers Conference in Portland. That was kind of for me a first kick in the butt. I was talking to, I don't know why and how, to somebody, and he's like, "Oh, I want to start a brewery." I'm like, "Yeah, why do you want to start a brewery?" I was like, "Yeah, I just gonna try to grow it as fast as possible, and then I'm gonna flip it in 5 years." I'm like, "Oh wow, we reached this point in our history in the U.S. craft brewing," and that's I think where this is only the US, you know. There's so much more potential, or there's so much young enthusiasm in so many different countries still. And I'm dreaming about doing something there, helping people out. We become as experienced brewers, and some simple sticks. Simple stuff. We've made twice mistakes with that, so we kind of answer with like nothing. And so I really want to take it broader again and get my fingers in way more different markets and way more different levels of brewing. Keep it there.
Now, just like when you left Belgium to come to Colorado, I mean, you came from an established industry to a young industry, and now the U.S. industry's grown quite a bit over the past few decades. I mean, you talk about helping, other places, and Frezi, I know you mentioned you enjoy when you go to South America. Do you think you would ever move to another country again and get involved in the brewing industry there?
I would love to. Hey,
How
life is
about
too
your
short.
wife?
Yeah, we are ready to travel. Looking forward, like you mentioned it yourself. Looking forward, and that COVID is a little more established to travel again.
You've got that itch. So speaking of travel, where are the places in the world you still want to visit?
So many.
You don't have that one, on your bucket list?
We did every continent except for Antarctica. We went twice to Japan, 5 times to Africa. We went to South America. We were actually going March a year ago, March 15. Peter was in Brazil. We were going to meet each other in Patagonia. And I called him, like, Peter, you're coming home. I'm not coming to you. So we have to pick that back up.
Yeah, so we when we married, we said we wanted to see the world. Moving to the US was kind of interesting because then we could change base. We had kids, 99, 2000. Initially, we couldn't travel too much, or we had to go to Belgium, of course, for the family. And then we traveled quite a bit with the kids, but now we're kind of free again. So it's time again to start moving, shaking.
Until they have kids. Not just kidding.
I hope they're not listening today.
No.
That's fascinating because we mentioned we travel quite a bit during this conversation. We all crave it. I mean, I can only imagine the challenges that you would face again and the excitement of moving to a new country all over again. I mean, just the energy that would flow through your bodies, that excitement level, it's something that would make me so anxious and nervous, but so I don't know, exciting at the exact same time.
But when you mentioned the word comfort zone, you have to push yourself out of your comfort zone to really learn faster again. And I want to challenge us in the coming years a bit about this on trying to find maybe do we want to settle somewhere else or how do we move on? And so that creates so much anxiety that I'm so passionate for me. Oh yeah, that's great.
The biggest challenge for me, and I think it's just because I give all the tours in Belgium and I had so many questions like, hey, stranger, where are you from? So the biggest challenge for me is we lived here since 96. And still today, people ask me where I'm from. And I still have a big challenge for that. I know I have a huge accent. But going back to South America, Africa, to a country where you don't speak that language, I know it's going to be another challenge for me. but it's going to be so much fun.
No, I love the attitude both of you have, because I think your accent and where you're from, that's part of your story. That's why we're here today, because it's who you are. It's what makes you interesting. It's a huge part of you, and that positivity that both of you radiate. I mean, I can feel it through the screen right now. I mean, we're not even in person. I can't imagine how great a time we would have. I gotta say, that's the first one of those I've seen on one of these. So everybody listening,
oh, was it censored? Do we have to do
here just now? But you know what? That's what's amazing. You guys have been, married for how many years now?
2 years.
You made the 92.
I mean, that's absolutely amazing, and just you love working together still. That story is inspiring. You've been a success as a couple. You've been a success in business, and you're just looking forward to adventures together for the rest of your lives. I really envy that, and I hope my wife and we continue to have the same love that you both have. So.
Thank you.
Peter and Frezi, this has been a fantastic and really inspiring conversation. I'm really much looking forward to sharing beers in person someday. Hopefully it won't be like when we were in Pennsylvania together, Peter, where it was just a blip in both of our lives. Hopefully we get to enjoy the moment and tell a story.
Yeah, it would be awesome.
Well, you're always welcome here in Purpose Brewing.
Well, I'm hopefully heading out to Denver and Colorado in the fall, so hopefully we make it happen then. But I really, really appreciate you both of you taking the time today. This has been fantastic. Enjoy your floof.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers. Talk to you later.
See ya. Good to talk to you.
You as well.